For years, Allied intelligence stared at an unbreakable fortress. They planned for a nightmare of steel and concrete. But when D-Day came, they discovered a shocking secret. Hitler's Atlantic Wall was a hollow shell. April 12, 1944, 30,000 feet above the French coast, somewhere between Calais and Boulogne. The world up here is just three things: the blinding, ice-blue sky, the gentle thrum of two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, and the cold that seeps through the fleece-lined boots of the pilot. He's flying a de Havilland Mosquito PR Merc 16, a plane made almost entirely of wood, painted a soft photo-recce blue to blend in with the high-altitude glare. He is utterly alone and utterly unarmed. His only weapon is speed, his only defense is altitude. Below him, the automatic F-52 camera in the belly of his aircraft methodically clicks and whirs, its lens pointed straight down. He's on the milk run, a high-speed dash over the most heavily defended airspace in the world, the Pas de Calais. Suddenly, the sky erupts. 4, then 8, then a dozen puffs of oily black smoke appear, seemingly from nowhere, scattered around his aircraft. Flak. The Flugabwehrkanone. They're tracking him. The pilot doesn't bank, he doesn't dive. Any change in direction will ruin the perfect, overlapping photographic strip his bosses demand. He just pushes the throttle forward, his knuckles white on the yoke, praying the predictors are having a bad day. The Mosquito shudders as a shell detonates 1,000 feet below, the shockwave slapping the light wooden airframe. He holds his course. 3 more minutes. The clicking of the camera is his countdown. Click whir, click whir. Hours later, those photographic canisters, dropped by parachute at RAF Benson, are being developed, interpreted, and rushed to a nondescript building in Bushy Park, London. This is Shah F. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. Inside, under the haze of cigarette smoke, Major General Kenneth Strong, Eisenhower's British G2 Chief of Intelligence, leans over a light table. He's joined by his American counterparts, peering through stereoscopes that turn the flat, black and white images into a terrifying three-dimensional reality. There, Strong says, his finger tapping the image. It's new since the 8th. A Regelbau 680 casemate. See the embrasure? That's angled for an 88mm gun, covering the beachhead, at that precise angle. On the wall, a map stretching 20 feet long shows the coast of France. It is covered in red ink. Thousands of red circles, triangles, and squares, each one a verified, photo-identified, concrete emplacement. It shows overlapping fields of fire from machine guns. It shows the calculated arcs of coastal artillery that can drop a shell 10 miles out to sea. It shows the newly laid Rommel's asparagus giant logs driven into the earth to impale gliders. It shows the Belgian gates, the hedgehogs, the tetrahedra, all designed to gut landing craft on the high tide. This is the Atlantic Wall. To the men planning Operation Overlord, this map is a nightmare. It is the physical manifestation of Dr. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda, which for 2 years had been screaming about the Festung Europa Fortress Europe, an impenetrable barrier of steel and concrete, stretching from the Arctic Circle in Norway to the Spanish border. German newsreels, captured by the Allies, showed thousands of Reichsarbeitsdienst, state labor service, men pouring oceans of concrete. They showed Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, now Inspector General of the Wall, striding along massive gun batteries, patting, smiling, confident soldiers on the back. In his office, General Omar Bradley, the man tapped to command the American ground forces for the invasion, stares at similar maps. His G2 has estimated that over 60,000 workers, many of them forced laborers from the organization TOT, have been working on this wall for years. The estimates of steel used are in the millions of tons. The concrete, in the tens of millions of cubic meters. Every calculation for D-Day is based on this data. Every casualty estimate, every ammunition quota, every decision on where to use the precious few Hobart's funnies, the specialized bunker-busting tanksis, dictated by this image of an unbreakable fortress. The fear is palpable. They are planning to throw divisions of young men directly into the teeth of the most sophisticated, deadly, and complete defensive line in human history. The wall is more than just concrete. It's a psychological weapon. And from London, it looks like Hitler's greatest and most terrifying accomplishment. February 15th, 1944. A grey, wind-swept beach near Le Havre, Normandy. The wind is brutal, carrying a biting spray of sea foam and sand that stings the face. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel pulls the collar of his long leather greatcoat tighter. His boots sink slightly into the wet sand as he walks, his famous tactical baton flicking impatiently at a tangle of seaweed. He is followed by a gaggle of subordinate officers, their faces pinched, notebooks flapping in the wind. Rommel stops and points his baton not at the sea, but inland, at a massive, half-finished concrete casemate. Rebar, already rusting in the salty air, sticks out of the top like broken teeth. There is no 88mm gun inside. There is just a dark, empty space. How long? Rommel's voice is sharp, cutting through the wind. A local commander, a portly oberst from the organization TOT, shifts nervously. Herr Feldmarschall, the concrete, the deliveries from the Reich are slow. We lack the steel for the reinforcement, and the labor units were reassigned to the V1 sites in the Pas-de-Calais. Rommel turns to face him. The man flinches, avoiding the field marshal's intense, piercing blue eyes. This is not the triumphant desert fox of propaganda. This is an angry, frustrated engineer. When Hitler had personally given him command of Army Group B and tasked him with inspecting and completing the Atlantic Wall in November 1943, Rommel had arrived with his trademark manic energy. He'd intended to build an impenetrable line. What he found was a farce. The wall wasn't a wall at all. It was, as he privately fumed to his aide, Captain Helmuth Lang, a string of flimsy, widely spaced points of strength, Stützpunkte, that a determined enemy could easily bypass. The propaganda was a lie. Goebbels' newsreels of endless concrete fortresses were clever fictions. The reality was this: the Kriegsmarine, Navy, had built some impressive coastal batteries for their big guns. The Luftwaffe had built fortified radar stations. But the Heer, Army, responsible for repelling the actual infantry invasion, had almost nothing. For hundreds of miles, especially along the Calvados coast of Normandy, the wall was little more than a few old French artillery pieces, some machine gun nests in converted beach villas, and vast, gaping, undefended stretches of sand. Worse than the concrete was the garrison. Rommel had inspected the men who were supposed to fight to the last. He was appalled. These were not the hardened, ideologically driven grenadier of the Eastern Front. These were the static divisions, the Bodenständige. He saw men in their late 42nds and 52nds, veterans of the First World War, recalled to service. He saw Volksdeutsch-Technik Germans from Poland, Alsace, and Czechoslovakia, many of whom barely spoke German and whose loyalty was questionable. Worst of all, he saw the Osttruppen. Thousands upon thousands of captured Soviet soldiers, Georgians, Ukrainians, Armenians, Russians who had been given a simple choice: starve to death in a POW camp, or put on a German uniform and fight for us. They manned many of the machine gun nests, commanded by a handful of German NCOs. Rommel knew these men wouldn't fight for Hitler. They would fight to survive. The moment an American or British soldier gave them a chance to surrender, they would take it. This is why Rommel was now a man obsessed. He knew he couldn't get more concrete. The entire Reich was focused on building U-boat pens and synthetic oil plants. He knew he couldn't get elite troops. They were all being ground up in the meatgrinder of Russia and Italy. So, he improvised. If we cannot stop them with concrete, he dictated to Lang, we will stop them with steel. We will stop them in the water. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. The only decisive 24 hours. He became a fanatic for beach obstacles. He ordered millions of minus the Teller mine and the Topf mine. And when those ran out, he had his engineers build makeshift ones out of artillery shells. He ordered millions of giant wooden stakes, angled toward the sea, to impale gliders and landing craft. This was Rommel's asparagus. He ordered the welding of Czech hedgehogs and the pouring of concrete tetrahedra. His plan was simple and desperate. Create a devil's garden, Teufelsgarten, so lethal that the Allies couldn't land, even at low tide. He would scatter so many mines that no man could walk. He would place so many obstacles that no craft could touch the shore. He was trying to build a fortress out of scrap metal and logs, because he knew the concrete fortress the Allies saw on their maps didn't exist. As he stood on that beach, staring at the empty, rusting bunker, Rommel knew a terrible secret. The Atlantic Wall was a bluff. It was a hollow shell, and he was just the set dresser, frantically trying to make the facade look real before the curtain rose. June 6th, 1944, 6:31 a.m. H-hour, Dog Green Sector, Omaha Beach. The steel ramp of the LCVP, landing craft, vehicle personnel, slams down with a deafening CLA-eng. For the men of A Company, 116th Infantry, the sound is a starting pistol for hell. Before the ramp is even halfway down, it begins. It's not a rifle shot. It's a noise that rips the air in half, a sound like a giant canvas sheet being torn at supersonic speed. It is the MG-42, Hitler's buzzsaw, firing 1,200 rounds per minute. The men at the front of the boat don't even step off. They are simply vaporized, torn apart in a pink mist of body parts and shredded olive-drab wool. They pile up in the ramp's opening, creating a gruesome dam. "Get off the boat! Go! Go!" A sergeant screams, shoving men over the gunwales into the churning, neck-deep water. Mortar rounds shump crash, whomp crash begin to walk across the water, the explosions lifting men out of the sea and slamming them back down, limp and broken. This is the nightmare. This is exactly what the Schiff planners saw on their maps. High on the bluffs, hidden in concrete casemates at Widerstandsnest 62, the men of the German 352nd Infantry Division are pouring, interlocking, pre-sighted fields of fire onto the beach. This is not a static division of old men. This is a battle-hardened unit, recently moved from the Eastern Front, that Allied intelligence had completely missed. For the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions, the Atlantic Wall is not a myth. It is the deadliest, most well-engineered killing field they have ever encountered. For hours, the invasion of France teeters on this single, 5-mile stretch of blood-soaked sand. June 6th, 1944, 6:45 a.m. Uncle Red Sector, Utah Beach. 20 miles to the west, the men of the 4th Infantry Division are staring, bewildered. The ramp on their LCVP drops. They hear distant thuds, some artillery, yes, but landing far inland. The beach in front of them is quiet. The men splash through the waist-deep water, rifles held high, expecting the buzzsaw. It never comes. They hit the sand. They crouch. They wait. Nothing. A lone German machine gun opens up, a slow, hesitant chug, chug, chug. It's an old, captured French gun. 2 GIs flank it, and it goes silent. The men start to walk, then jog, up the beach. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., son of the former president, is walking among them, waving his cane, calmly directing traffic as if on a training exercise. The combat engineers move up to the first concrete pillbox, a Regelbau 680, just like the ones on the spy photos. They prepare their satchel charges. Suddenly, a white flagger dirty undershirt on a stick is shoved out of the firing slit. The GIs storm the position, kicking in the steel door. Inside, they find not blonde-haired supermen, but 4 terrified, middle-aged men in oversized tunics. They are Osttruppen, Poles, forced into the German army, who surrender so fast they are almost tripping over each other to get their hands in the air. June 6th, 1944, 11 a.m. Near La Madeleine, Utah Beach. The confusion deepens. As the 4th Division moves inland, they encounter one of the fortress's most terrifying-looking artillery batteries. The photo reconnaissance had shown 4 massive 155mm guns, perfectly camouflaged. They were a primary target. A patrol from the 8th Infantry Regiment cautiously approaches. They round a corner and stop, rubbing their eyes. The guns are logs. They are massive. 1 2-foot-long telegraph poles, painted black and mounted on crude wooden carriages, shoved into the earth, and brick emplacements to look like artillery from 20,000 feet. The entire battery, which had diverted Allied bombers for weeks, was a complete fake. This story begins to repeat itself all along the coast, everywhere except Omaha. At Gold Beach, the British find concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick facing the sea and 6 inches thick on the landward side, with no rebar. A single Piat projector, infantry, anti-tank, round blows the back wall clean off. At Sword Beach, a terrifyingly large casemate designed for a 105mm cannon is found to house a single 50mm anti-tank gun from 1938, mounted on a wooden block. But perhaps the most surreal discovery comes in the Cotentin Peninsula. After a brief firefight, men of the 101st Airborne capture a German bunker. Inside are 2 men. They are not German. They are not Polish or Russian. They are Korean. They are identified as Yang Kyongjong and another man. They had been conscripted by the Japanese, captured by the Soviets at Khalkhin Gol, conscripted by the Red Army, captured by the Germans at Stalingrad, and finally forced into the Wehrmacht and sent to guard a beach in France. The reports filtering back to General Omar Bradley's command ship, the USS Augusta, are a schizophrenic nightmare. His radio crackles with one message from Omaha: "We are being annihilated. Our men are trapped, leaders shot down. Evacuate." The next message, from Utah: "We are advancing at will. Meeting light resistance. Casualties minimal." Bradley is shocked. The intelligence is wrong. But how is it wrong? Is it a fortress, or is it a Potemkin village? The truth, he is realizing, is that it is somehow both. June 14th, 1944, 8 days after D-Day. A captured bunker complex overlooking the ruins of the Utah Beach causeways. The air is thick with the sweet, sickening smell of decay and damp concrete. Major John Cross, a G2 intelligence officer with 7th Corps, stands inside a Regelbau 669 casemate. This bunker, designated Stützpunkt W5, was marked on his pre-invasion map as a primary threat. It was supposedly a command and control center with an integrated 88mm gun, perfectly placed to enfilade the beach. Cross has that map in his hand. He looks at the red triangle printed on the acetate overlay, then looks at the reality around him. The bunker is massive. The concrete is thick, but the smell of shoddy workmanship is everywhere. He scrapes his boot over a section of the floor that was hit by a naval shell. The concrete has crumbled into gravel. "Too much sand," he mutters. The organization TOT had clearly been cutting corners, stretching their meager cement rations. He walks into the main firing chamber. The embrasure is indeed perfectly sighted, but there is no 88mm gun. There is no gun at all. There is only a large, circular steel plate on the floor, on which a much smaller, ancient French 75mm Guna relic from 1917 had been crudely bolted. It had been knocked off its mount by the first concussion from the USS Nevada. In the corner, he sees the living quarters. The steel bunks are covered in filth. On a small table, he finds a stack of letters written in a script he doesn't recognize. He picks one up. It's not German. It's Cyrillic. These weren't crack troops. They were Osttruppen. He steps outside into the bright June sunlight. A team of combat engineers is clearing the area. One of them, a sergeant, waves him over. "Hey, Major, you gotta see this. It's that battery that was shelling us on D+1. Cross follows him to a position 200 yards inland. On his map, this was marked 4-gun artillery battery, 155mm, heavy fortification. It had been bombed twice by B-26, marauders, and shelled for an hour by a cruiser. He arrives at the position and just stares. The fortifications are mounds of earth and brick, clearly built to look like concrete casemates from the air. And the guns. They're not guns. They are massive, painted telephone poles, angled skyward, mounted on wagon wheels. They are dummies. The entire battery, which had absorbed tons of Allied high explosives, was a complete fake, designed to draw fire and deceive reconnaissance. Reports like this are now flooding Supreme Headquarters. The shock is setting in, but it's not the shock of a fierce enemy. It's the shock of a con artist's victim. In his temporary headquarters in Normandy, General Omar Bradley is finally able to piece together the puzzle. The intelligence hadn't been wrong about Omaha. At Omaha, they had faced the one sector of the wall that was exactly as advertised, manned by the 1 Unitha 352nd infantry that was combat-ready. That single, terrifying sector had reinforced the entire myth. But everywhere else, it was a different story. The thousands of tons of steel were often just rusted rebar or, in many cases, old French railway tracks. The impenetrable concrete was often a sandy, brittle mix, poured in thin layers. The elite garrison was a collection of 50-year-old men, demoralized Poles, and terrified Russians. The terrifying artillery was a hodgepodge of obsolete, captured guns from every nation Germany had conquered: Czech, French, Polish, and Russian, all with different calibrations and, in many cases, lacking the correct ammunition. The Atlantic Wall, the most feared defensive line in history, was a magnificent, terrifying, and almost entirely hollow shell. It was a masterpiece of propaganda. Rommel, with his desperate last-minute improvisation of mines and asparagus, had been like a set dresser, frantically trying to make the flimsy cardboard props look real. The American and British generals, Eisenhower and Montgomery included, were stunned. They had planned for a war of brute force against a fortress. They had estimated casualties especially for the airborne divisions at upwards of 70% or 80%. They had expected a 6-month battle just to get off the beaches. Instead, they found themselves facing a theatrical production, a deadly one. To be sure, the mines, the machine guns, and the mortars were all too real. But the fortress itself, the idea of the wall, was a psychological operation. And it had worked. It had cowed the Allies, influenced their planning, and channeled their immense power against a ghost. The only thing more shocking than the wall's existence was the realization that, in most places, it had never existed at all. July 1st, 1944. A Chef command tent near Port-en-Bessin, Normandy. The front line is now 20 miles inland, bogged down in the dense, ancient hedgerows of the bocage. The sound of artillery is a constant, dull thump in the distance. Inside the tent, analysts from G2 intelligence are finally compiling the full picture. The maps they are creating now are not pre-invasion estimates. They are post-invasion realities, and they tell a story of strategic failure and logistical starvation on a colossal scale. General Kenneth Strong, Eisenhower's G2, reviews the after-action report, Atlantic Wall Defenses. The truth, he now sees, is that the Allies hadn't just faced a physical defense. They had been the primary target of one of the most successful and widespread deception campaigns in history. The hollow shell wasn't an accident. It was an inevitability, born of 3 factors. First, strategic starvation. The wall's main enemy wasn't the Allies. It was the Ostfront, the Eastern Front. For every 1 gun, 1 ton of steel, or 1 high-quality soldier sent to France, Hitler had to send 10 to Russia to stop the Red Army. The vast, gaping wound of the Eastern Front bled the Wehrmacht dry. The Atlantic Wall, in Hitler's strategic mind, was a tertiary priority, far behind stopping the Soviets and defending the Reich itself from the Allied bombing campaign. The analysts looked at the organization Tot's own records, captured in Cherbourg. The quotas for concrete were astronomical, but the fulfillment was pathetic. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, had faced a simple choice: use his concrete to build bomb-proof U-boat pens at Lorient and Brest, or use it to build army pillboxes on a beach. He chose the U-boats. He chose to build underground V-2 rocket factories. The Heer Army got the leftovers. Second, competing doctrines. The generals themselves couldn't agree on what the wall was for. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the supreme commander in the West, believed the wall was a joke. He called it a propaganda bluff. He wanted to let the Allies land, trap them on the coast, and then annihilate them with a massive, centralized panzer counterattack. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, by contrast, knew the Luftwaffe was gone. He knew any panzer attack would be obliterated by Allied fighter bombers the moment it moved. He believed, fanatically, that the only chance was to stop the Allies in the water, on the sand, in the first 24 hours. The result was a disastrous compromise. Hitler, as usual, waffled. Rommel didn't get the panzers he wanted near the beach. Von Rundstedt didn't get the full reserve he wanted inland, and the wall itself received neither the men nor the materiel to function as Rommel intended. It became a tripwire, but a poorly manned and badly constructed one. Finally, the power of propaganda. This was the true shock for Allied intelligence. Dr. Goebbels, it turned out, was the wall's chief architect. The German propaganda ministry had spent 2 years and vast resources filming the wall's construction. They'd released newsreels which Allied intelligence eagerly watched, showing Rommel inspecting massive coastal batteries, often the same battery, filmed from 10 different angles. They showed thousands of workers, many of whom were only there for the film crew, pouring endless concrete. This propaganda offensive had a dual purpose. First, it was meant to terrify the Allies, to make them delay their invasion, to make them build more, plan more, and second-guess themselves. On this front, it was a spectacular success. The fear of the wall had dominated Allied planning for a year. Second, it was meant to reassure the German people that Festung Europa was secure, so they could focus on the war in the east. The generals at Chaev realized they had been planning their invasion based not on German engineering, but on German public relations. But there was a terrifying corollary to this discovery. As one planner wrote in his report, "We were shocked to find the wall was a hollow shell, but we are now forced to reckon with a more disturbing thought. What if it hadn't been? What if Hitler had not been obsessed with the Eastern Front? What if the 352nd Infantry had been garrisoning all 5 beaches, not just Omaha? What if the dummy telephone poles had been real 155mm guns? What if the Osttruppen had been replaced with Waffen-SS? The invasion, everyone agreed, would have been a catastrophe. It would have failed on the beaches. The hollow shell they had discovered wasn't just a sign of German weakness. It was a testament to their own extraordinary and terrifyingly narrow escape. The bluff had almost worked.